So, Griffin, you want to talk a little bit about like the genesis of like not just like the inspiration, but maybe some of the musical things that kind of play into the writing of it?
Yeah, yeah. So this was, I mean, I tossed this in the program notes, which is is a sort of condensed version, but I mean the three of us know the like musical genesis, which is that I was at Michigan with Drew, and Drew helped indoctrinate me into saxophones
Into the
Career
saxophone
number
in a
land.
3.
very saxophone rich environment. Sort of got me on the train toot toot, and so after writing a piece for a tenor piece for him, and then also a quartet piece for the quartet that he's in, we eventually sort of like pinged eventually like, hey, it'd be cool to do a concerto at some point. And it kind of it was a lot of things kind of converged when it became a conversation between the three of us, because I have this long standing like eventual plan where I want to write 5 concerti, for one for each Great Lake. And so knowing that you were in, this was not the reason why I approached you specifically, Matt, but we knew each other from the internet and from things and hanging out in Cleveland. And so when we started talking, I was like, oh, dang, this might be a great opportunity for that. So that those threads converged with the Eric Stokes Fund, which is also very environmentally oriented. So I was like, that all goes into a perfect little thing. In terms of like the approach for the piece, that came from the sort of environmental aspect, because the first concerto I wrote was for Lake Superior, which was the lake that I was living on at the time, and I had this very specific, close relationship with it. And Lake Erie was a lake that I had swam in before. It's not like I've never been there.
Oh no,
You're like,
not
don't do
healthy.
that.
Don't recommend. No.
Well, that's the thing, is that it has this long sort of stereotypic history for being like the dirty bad one. So I was like, I need to figure out how to like click with that. And I remember learning back in the day about like the Cuyahoga River Fire of 1969 and all that stuff, and sort of this long history of it being kind of the dirty one. And when I started looking at it, it's actually, I mean, it's way better now. Way better now. Actually, really interesting, like genuinely interesting scientific stuff, where Lake Erie and Lake Ontario are they're lakes, but they're kind of like essentially they kind of operate as like big long rivers, because they have this very specific current. So when you start doing environmental, like cleaning them up, they actually clean themselves out fairly well. So there's Lake Erie and Lake Ontario doing way better, like crashingly better. But the thing that really kind of like pinged me on structure was I was looking at just things about the history of Lake Erie and environmental like activism after the Cuyahoga River Fire of 1969, and that led me to a bunch of organizations that are sort of Lake Erie watershed health, oriented organizations. And one of them was talking about how the different factors that kind of are visible signs of watershed health, and one of them is bird populations. And so that fact was like, oh great, boop. So the structure of this piece is birds, no birds, birds. That's I was like, I have the image in my head of that. That is the 3 movement structure of this thing, is birds, no birds, birds. And it really then sort of remained to be seen what that looked like. So there's one of the birds that lives in like the kinds of environments that are in the Great Lakes area, like marshy areas, is the red-winged blackbird, and which is a beautiful bird, but also has a very distinctive sound. It makes this kind of like sound, and Drew's like, cool, got it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
And,
First page makes a lot of sense now.
Yes. So basically it's always funny that basically the main sounds that a red-winged blackbird makes are either that fiddly fiddly kind of thing, or just a little like cluck, just goes like it makes two sounds, and so that is like one of the primary sounds that Drew makes, is that kind of like little leapy, like perfect fifth minor seventh situation. And I have this very specific memory of Sue and I went for a hike. We took a long weekend vacation up to like the thumb of Michigan, like a Bay City area, and we were doing this walk on this elevated little walkway through the woods, these kind of marshy woods. And I remember hearing this marsh just full of red-winged blackbirds, just like I can't even like demonstrate it certainly, but like I have a video somewhere on my phone of the sound that all of these red-winged blackbirds were making together, and it was this really interesting kind of, I wouldn't say cacophonous sound, but it's it's this very kind of like melodious thing that's happening over and over again. So that kind of is the sound that we build up to at the end of the first and the third movement, is that kind of like kind of multiple voices doing that same kind of pattern and things that have kind of releasing into this big chorus of birds. Once I had the bird movements down, I was like, and then a not bird movement, which to me I was like, this has to be sort of the like industrialism, kind of like us like dampening that bird sound, you know what I mean, a very intentional kind of moving away from that. And so I kind of toyed around with that for a long time. I was thinking very kind of like big and clangy and industrial, and eventually what I landed on was not something that was necessarily big and industrial, but kind of I made a joke a year and a half, 2 years ago on Twitter that was like, I really love when composers in the middle of a piece say, hey, let's just go to a nasty carnival for a while. And that's kind of and that's kind of what happens. I mean, it's really the intention is essentially the shape of the second movement is kind of this like bitter biting dance, this kind of like it's a very we're dancing recklessly and destroying things, and then seeing the destruction that we wrought, and then we continue to dance anyway. You know what I mean? It's that sort of like dancing in the face of even being very aware of what are the consequences of what we're doing. So it's kind of, it eventually has that build of where we're causing consequences and sort of like causing ruin until we finally reach sort of like full catastrophe, which is the end of the second movement, is like full tilt catastrophe, super loud sounds, break drums, everyone sawing away and screaming together. Yes. So full on catastrophe. And then the third movement is trying to like slowly work our way back to birds. It starts off in a place of kind of aimlessness. It's trying to like reestablish itself. It's trying to get back to what felt like a simpler time. And what ends up happening, this was a thing that one of those things where I had an idea, and then eventually like this is a very composer thing of like, you can have an idea and then eventually things are just gonna like hit you like a Mack truck, and you're like, hey, that's the idea, yoink. And what ended up happening is the way the harmonies work at the beginning of the third movement, it's like trying to venture out of this one tonal center, and then eventually just sort of meanders and ends up back where it started. It's almost like it's trying to go elsewhere. It's trying to affect change. It's trying to figure out how to get out of this, and it can't. Like, it has this kind of like stilted attempt to move somewhere, and then it ends up just sort of walking in circles for a while. It feels kind of a little bit hopeless for a while of like, I don't know how to get out of this cycle. You know what I mean? I don't know where exactly this is headed. And then eventually there's kind of a whisper, like the beginning of birds again. And that kind of like kicks off this trajectory up back towards what feels like hopefully like a recapitulation, that sort of re-entering that kind of that balanced place. And ultimately, it is bringing back some of that original sort of hopeful material, but it's different. I mean, it heads in different directions. It has different relationships. It resolves differently. And I really wanted there to be elements of everything that came before that at the end, to say, I don't want this piece, although it is environmentally oriented, I don't want it to be like like eco-fascist. I don't want it to be like the answer is kill all humans, because that's not, you know what I mean? That's not the answer here. You know, there's a way that we can be intentional about what we do, and there's a way that we can affect change and sort of not erase the things that we did before, but like make a positive influence on things that we have changed in the past. So it's kind of, I didn't want it to be like we're back in the original music with no people, thank goodness. You know what I mean? That's not sort of the intention. So that was a lot of words about how this this piece
A lot
came
of
to be.
words, a lot of birds.
Yeah. Drew, I'm curious. You've had a little bit of time to spend with it. How does well, first of all, I guess, what are your impressions about what you as the soloist is being asked to do in the piece? And then now that you've kind of heard Griffin talk about kind of the genesis and the deeper dive, does that help offer some clarity to some of the things that you are perhaps experiencing in your preparation that maybe were perhaps not as evident?
Yes, let me start with your second question. So hearing Griffin talk about this, I think a lot of things make more sense as far as like not only how the first, third movements are related to each other, how the second movement is significantly different from the other two, but also you'll hear in the piece that this whole ba-da-dee idea does repeat quite a lot. And I remember my first listen through thinking it was a very short melodic idea. And like, I wasn't sure if it would grow into a large melodic idea, but it kind of stays that short idea, and that idea is kind of manipulated from not only being the perfect fifth, major seventh, minor seventh, whatever you said, minor seventh, but then it gets manipulated into different permutations of that, keeping the same rhythm. So I think it clarifies a lot of things, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think I think thinking through those program notes and having program notes while listening to this really will help paint a picture within the piece, which is exactly what I would expect from a piece by Griffin Candey. I said earlier, one of us said earlier, this will be the third piece I've premiered of Griffin's music. The first one was a Triumph for the Persistently Nice for tenor saxophone and piano, then a shorter piece of God Forbid for saxophone quartet, which I also played the tenor part for, and now this. So I think when I got this piece from Griffin, and I knew what I was getting into. I knew exactly what to expect, and I am so thrilled with the product that came from it. Griffin and I first talked to each other in spring 2020.
I think so. That feels right. It feels like 3,000 years ago.
I know. It was right before both of us started at the University of Michigan. And a mutual friend of ours actually tagged both of us in a tweet of all things, like, hey, Griffin and Drew are going to the same school. They should do something. I've tried to find the tweet and I can't find it anymore. Yeah, I wish I screenshotted it. I know
it probably exists somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah. So I went through and was listening to some of Griffin's stuff, and I really, really loved it. The saxophone, so often we get so much music that is just hard for the sake of being hard. And don't get me wrong, I play that music. I have performed that music a lot, where it is just insanely, needlessly complex, challenging, hard, really expands what the saxophone can actually do. But hearing Griffin's music, it's not hard to make me mad. Like, I thought his music was very beautiful, very flowing, and something that the saxophone doesn't have a lot of. So we first started talking about doing a sonata, which I premiered with Liz Ames at the University of Michigan, and we later did a recording of it. And I think after that, after the quartet, like, I thought this man needs to write a saxophone concerto, and it needs to be a tenor concerto. Like, I think this is something that the saxophone really needs. Like, the saxophone we have so much new music. Composers are so nice to saxophonists, which I very much appreciate. But the composers aren't as nice to the tenor saxophone, and saxophonists aren't as nice to the tenor saxophone. And I think a big part in that is just because there's not a lot of repertoire to begin with. So I've really made it like my mission and my goal as a performer to try and promote as much tenor saxophone music as I can. And I think this concerto is going to go a long way in showing people that the tenor saxophone is not that one that's in the middle, that's not the soprano or not the alto. It has that little curvy thing on the neck. But it's its own instrument. It has its own unique voice. It's a legitimate instrument, and it deserves to be taken seriously like all the other saxophones. And I'm just thrilled with this piece. Griffin's awesome. I expected nothing less from the piece from Griffin, and this is great. The Cleveland Repertory Orchestra sounds fantastic. Whenever I've heard them, I've been absolutely blown away. So this is gonna be great. It's gonna be so much fun.
Yeah, I
think
it's
I answered
interesting
your
for
question.
me. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as somebody who has heard Griffin's music, but who has not needed to study it before, certainly not to a point where like I need to figure out how it works and then put it back together again. Um, and so, I've been around enough new music, especially for saxophone, that like it very much resonates with me. This idea that people seem focused about making it about exploiting the technique of the instruments, and that's like almost the singular goal. And it's like I was very, I mean, I knew better in knowing enough of Griffin's work to think that that's what this would be, but I was very pleasantly surprised when I started digging in and knew that it was not that.
It's also, I mean, I don't think it's like easy peasy.
Oh no, definitely not. Like
no,
but yeah,
even in the sonata, when I first got the sonata and when I first got this, I'm like, eighth notes and chord notes, like, let's go. This will be easy. And then like you actually start looking at it and it's like, oh no, how do you count a triplet again?
Yeah. There are pieces of it that I think are not perhaps inherently difficult, but I think when being paired with some of what is being asked of the orchestra will be tricky to put together. I'm all, one of the things that as somebody who approaches people to write things, not knowing what the things are going to be, I'm always interested in people who have interesting ways to exploit color. And I think, it's a fine line between composers that use like all the percussion things and the harp thing and the piano thing, and like it's easy when you have all of the things on the stage to be able to create lots of cool colors. I'm much more intrigued by people who do more with far less. And I think that this, there is a lot of cool percussion stuff. There is some piano, but it's not in a way that feels overly exploitative to me, which is something that I really appreciate, and especially as somebody leading a group that is kind of still getting out there, it's not necessarily easy for us to be able to like wrangle all of the things together either, and being constrained by our venues in terms of how much space we have and needing to be creative in those ways. So I think that for me, this checks any kind of like not only musical but like logistical box I could have hoped for in like what I was hoping the thing could be, because I've been on commissions where like you make certain asks of composers going into the project and it can be detrimental coming out of it. And so there's always that like interesting risk when you open the score for the first time of like, what's it going to be? And then sometimes it's like, this is awesome, and sometimes it's like, oh, okay. And I was not worried, let me just put that out there, but it's comforting after you open that score for the first time and realize that you have nothing to be worried about.
It's cool. Yeah. I appreciate that. I genuinely appreciate that you appreciate that. I'm very much, and I will not like wildly soapbox, but I completely agree with you on the sort of like doing more with less thing. It's the difference between like I'm going to paint this picture and I have every color that is available to humanity, and I'm going to paint this picture and I have this palette, and it's not a limited palette, it's still a lot of palette, but I also just don't need all of these things. You know what I mean? I can do that. I can mix these things. I can sort of be intentional about the things that I have. I think especially coming from the opera world, like this is the case for any piece, but especially if you want an opera to be done more than one time or perhaps at all, thinking about, do I really need that instrument? Do I really need, do I need 4 percussionists, or can I make it work with 3? Do I need a harp and a piano? You know what I mean? What, like, that kind of making yourself make choices. And especially with, when I was talking to Drew about tenor saxophone concerti, and I was like, are there, what one should I listen to? I remember, Drew, you were like, well, there's there's some. And so because the intention was to create a concerto that the tenor players could come back to, hopefully as much as possible. I did not want to get in the way of that by saying, okay, this is a concerto for tenor saxophone, but also needs 5 percussionists and a piano and a harp and pitched, like very specific pitched tie gongs, and you know what I mean? And 3/4 size violins. And I if anything, sometimes I lean in the very like petite side of things. Like no wind instruments are doubling on anything. Like it's just straight up the winds playing their primary thing. And I'm not asking an orchestra to pay anyone doubling pay. Like keeping it as, I know the players don't like that. They would probably want to be paid more to play like 4 measures on the piccolo, but that kind of thing. It's not, those things kind of, they go hand in hand to me. The kind of like, both the like making the colors, this sort of not limited, but like more sort of clicked in palette of colors work for a larger work, and sort of maintain its freshness and crispness throughout. And also that like practical, genuinely like financial element of things,
Yeah, I think like when talking about tenor saxophone concertos in general, like there really just aren't a lot, because a lot of times when composers are approached to write saxophone concerti, they just assume it's an alto one, or they assume it's a soprano concerto. Like there are some tenor saxophone concertos, a lot of them may be a bit more dated. Like when it comes to modern concerti, we have a couple. I'm biased, but I really like some that I've premiered. Robert Gross and Josh Trinidad both have phenomenal concerti. But other than that, like you start to run into either pieces that may be too large, pieces that maybe just aren't available, pieces that like you can't really get your hands on. So I don't want this piece to be like a only Drew Hosler can play it, and that is the only person that will ever play the piece. Like something that means even more to me as a performer is seeing other saxophonists play things that I premiered. Like that always means the world to me when I go on Facebook and I'm like, oh, I did that. I played that piece. It premiered it 5 years ago, and like somebody else is doing it. Like that's great for the composer. Like it's so cool that it is inspiring other people.
And I think too, one of the things that I really enjoy, not only are you forced to make decisions about what has to happen, but you have to be really intentional about how you use the voices that you're given. And you have to, there are lots of logistical decisions that go into whether a piece makes it on the bill or not. The first thing that I look for, in all honesty, is like, what's my percussion complement? Especially with an orchestra that's largely volunteers. Like, my first question has to be, are they going to have everything, and are we going to be able to fit all of the things wherever we're going to be? And if the answer is no, like it gets put at the bottom of the pile. It may not be like eliminated from the pile, but it certainly gets moved farther down. And I think too, one of the things that I am really interested in is there's a lot of awesome color in the orchestra accompaniment, and only parts of it are tricky, and not like difficult, just tricky. And I think that when you think about whether or not a piece is going to get multiple performances, that makes a big difference, because I think that the piece, especially once you understand the genesis of what the sounds are being created to emulate, then it suddenly becomes even more approachable for the orchestral musicians to get in and be able to sort the sound out. I say that as somebody who's not rehearsed it yet to know whether or not that's true. But in thinking about the musicians that I know are going to play this, I think I can speak confidently that is how that will go.
Mm.
Well, and something that I really do appreciate about Griffin's music and all of the pieces I've played of his is that I feel like quite often, like let's take this the Triumph for the Persistently Nice, the tenor sax sonata, for example. It is not a piece for tenor saxophone with piano. It is a duo for tenor saxophone and piano. And in my first listen through this, like, I feel like this is not tenor saxophonist out front showing off, being crazy, being cool, with the orchestra going boom chick in the background. Like, it is an orchestral work that features the saxophonists out front doing the bird calls, doing the Messiaen thing. But then, I mean, with and that's just something I've always really enjoyed. Like, it is a piece that I hope the orchestra will enjoy playing, and they will feel that it is worthwhile for themselves to perform as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've already gotten comments about people who are saying like they are super stoked, and like, to be fair, I'm totally in that camp also. So like, let's just put that out there. But
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people, like, because I made the MIDI available for them because we've got a short amount of time, rehearsal time, to put it together, and it's not over a span of weeks like we had been. It's over a span of days, and so they really need to come to the table with as much information as possible. And so I know that I've already started getting comments from people who've listened to it who are like, this is really unique. Like, let's get it. And like, you can tell that it's like unique, like they're intrigued by it, but they're not quite, like, they haven't figured it out yet. And so that intrigue coming into a first rehearsal is something that I am always inspired by, because it's like, you can tell when musicians are really interested in it, but like, they just need the, like, how do we make sense of the details? And when it happens, it's like, oh, the thing makes sense.
Hey.
Hey, right. So like, I'm excited that they're excited. I'm excited that it's like, I'm excited anytime I get to do a new thing, but like, to have awesome collaborators and people that I trust to create the good music and to replicate the good music and like bring all of the artistry to the table is just like, that's my idea of a good time. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Sweet.
I just a button on that. I really
plus one that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's, as much as it was a long process to get all the threads sort of like knit together into a thing, there are a lot of things about it that just like, this sounds very like after school especially, but it just like kind of felt right. You know what I mean? There are a lot of things that kind of just fell into place that really felt right. And I still feel that way, and I'm excited about next month.
Awesome.
I've been looking forward to this piece and this collaboration since we first started talking, however many months, years ago. I don't even know how long this has all been coming together.
Years.
Yeah, time means nothing.
Back when we were baby children.
Exactly. But I've been looking forward to this for so long, so I'm so excited. I was so excited and happy when I got that email from Griffin with the first draft of everything. So